"I want 50% of your little website thing," Brandon announced through his attorney during our divorce mediation, leaning back in his chair with the smug confidence of a man who spent 15 years dismissing everything I did. "Marital asset. She started it while we were married, probably makes a few $100 a month from ads. I deserve my fair share." His lawyer nodded seriously, clearly having been fed the same dismissive characterization of my work, while I sat across the conference table trying to keep my face neutral. What Brandon didn't know, what he'd never bothered to ask, investigate, or even vaguely inquire about during our entire marriage, was that my little website had evolved into one of the most successful educational platforms in the country, and the forensic accountant he insisted on hiring was about to discover exactly how catastrophically wrong he'd been. The marriage had ended because of Brandon's affair. More accurately, it had ended because of Brandon's fifth affair, the one I'd finally decided I couldn't ignore. The previous 4 had been mistakes, momentary lapses, not what they looked like. I'd stayed because of the children, because of our history, because I'd believed his promises to change. The 5th one was different. He'd moved out of our bedroom and into a downtown apartment with his 26-year-old assistant, announcing he needed space to find himself, while still expecting me to maintain his household, raise his children, and pretend everything was fine. I'd filed for divorce the next morning. Brandon had been shocked, not that I'd found out about the affair, but that I'd actually done something about it. In 15 years of marriage, I'd never pushed back on anything. I'd been the accommodating wife, the supportive partner, the woman who made his life comfortable while he pursued his career and his extracurricular activities. He'd assumed I'd accommodate this too. He'd assumed wrong. The divorce proceedings had been contentious from the start. Brandon wanted the house, the cars, primary custody of our 2 children, and a minimal alimony payment. He believed he was entitled to these things because he was the real earner in the family, a mid-level marketing executive who made $180,000 a year and never let anyone forget it. I'd been a stay-at-home mother for most of our marriage. That's what Brandon told everyone, and that's what he believed. The reality was more complicated. When our youngest started school, I'd found myself with hours of free time I didn't know how to fill. I'd started a blog about cooking, nothing serious, just recipes I'd developed over years of feeding a family. I'd taught myself web design, photography, video editing. I'd created content that people seemed to enjoy. Then I'd started a YouTube channel. Then an Instagram account. Then a podcast. Then, 3 years ago, a subscription-based educational platform where I taught home cooking techniques, meal planning, and nutrition. Brandon had never paid attention to any of it. "Your internet stuff," he'd call it dismissively. "Your little hobby." He'd complain about the time I spent on my computer, the equipment I'd purchased, the occasional weekends I'd spent filming content. But he'd never asked what I was actually doing, never looked at what I'd built, never imagined that his wife might be capable of creating something valuable. In his mind, I was playing pretend while he did real work. In reality, I'd built a company worth more than he'd earn in a dozen lifetimes. The forensic accountant was Brandon's idea. He'd been convinced I was hiding something, money, maybe an affair of my own, some secret life I'd concealed. He'd demanded a full financial investigation, certain it would reveal assets he could claim. "She's been spending money somewhere," he'd told his lawyer. "New equipment for her videos. A home office renovation. She must have a secret account." The accountant's name was David Mercer, a certified fraud examiner with 30 years of experience untangling complex financial situations. He'd been hired to find hidden assets and trace the flow of money through our marital finances. What he found instead was a business empire. The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in March. Brandon arrived looking smug, ready to watch me be exposed as whatever kind of deceiver he'd imagined. His attorney had prepared questions designed to paint me as financially manipulative. Instead, David Mercer took the stand and destroyed Brandon's entire narrative. "Mr. Mercer," Brandon's attorney began, "you were hired to examine the finances of both parties in this divorce. Can you summarize your findings regarding Mrs. Ashford's income?" "Certainly." David opened a thick folder. "Mrs. Ashford operates an educational platform called Kitchen Mastery, focused on cooking instruction and nutritional guidance. The platform offers subscription-based access to video courses, meal planning tools, and community features." "And what is the revenue from this platform?" "Annual revenue for the current fiscal year is projected at $118.4 million. The room went silent. Brandon's attorney's pen stopped moving. Brandon himself had gone very still, his face frozen in an expression of incomprehension. "I'm sorry," the attorney said. "Did you say million?" "Yes. The platform currently has approximately 340,000 paid subscribers at $29 per month. That's $9.86 million in monthly recurring revenue. Additionally, there's income from advertising partnerships, book deals, and licensing agreements that bring the total to approximately $118 million annually. Brandon made a sound, somewhere between a laugh and a choke. That's impossible. I assure you, the documentation is comprehensive. I've reviewed bank statements, tax filings, corporate records, and platform analytics. David looked at Brandon with the clinical detachment of someone who'd seen every type of financial deception and wasn't impressed by any of them. Mrs. Ashford is the sole owner of Kitchen Mastery LLC. She founded it 4 years ago and has grown it into one of the most successful subscription-based educational platforms in the cooking and nutrition space. She's a stay-at-home mother. She doesn't work. Sir, with respect, she employs 47 people. She has corporate offices in downtown, although she primarily works from her home studio. Her personal income last year was $34 million after business expenses and reinvestment. Brandon turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before, something like betrayal, which was rich coming from a man who'd cheated on me 5 times. You never told me, he said. You never asked. The mediation collapsed immediately. Brandon's attorney requested a recess. They retreated to a conference room for what my lawyer described as a come-to-Jesus meeting about recalibrating their expectations. He really didn't know, my attorney, Patricia, asked me during the break. He really didn't know. He called it my little hobby for 4 years. He complained about me spending too much time on the computer. He never once asked what I was actually doing or why companies were sending me products to feature, and you didn't tell him? Why would I? He wasn't interested. He was too busy with his career, his golf games, his affairs. The one time I tried to show him a milestone, we'd hit 100,000 subscribers, he said, "That's nice, honey," and went back to watching football. Patricia shook her head slowly. In 30 years of family law, I've never seen anything quite like this. What happens now? Now, we negotiate. Brandon wanted 50% of your little website. Under California community property law, he might have a claim to half of the company's value since it was created during the marriage. I felt my stomach drop. That's millions of dollars. It could be. But there are arguments to be made. The company was built primarily through your individual effort and expertise. The majority of growth happened during the period when he was having affairs and contributing minimally to the household. And most importantly, Patricia smiled. He spent the last 6 months claiming you don't really work, that you're incapable of supporting yourself. And that he deserves primary custody because you're just a stay-at-home mom. He can't have it both ways. Either you're a successful businesswoman whose assets he's entitled to, or you're the dependent spouse he's been describing. The inconsistency undermines his credibility on everything. The negotiations that followed were brutal but revealing. Brandon's initial position was predictable. He wanted half of everything. Half the company value, half the future earnings, half the brand I'd built with my face, my voice, my expertise. He's entitled to marital property, his attorney argued. The company was created during the marriage. The company was created through my client's individual labor during a period when Mr. Ashford was demonstrably disengaged from the marriage, Patricia countered. He contributed nothing to its development, showed no interest in its success, and in fact repeatedly denigrated it as a hobby, unworthy of attention. That doesn't diminish his legal claim. No, but it does speak to equitable distribution. And it certainly speaks to credibility. Your client has spent 6 months telling this court that my client is an unemployable dependent who needs his financial support. Now he's claiming she built a $118 million business while simultaneously being incapable of self-sufficiency. Brandon's attorney shuffled papers uncomfortably. Furthermore, Patricia continued, we have documentation of Mr. Ashford's serial infidelity, including the financial resources he diverted to maintaining his extramarital relationships. Company credit cards used for hotel rooms, gifts for mistresses, a second apartment he rented without my client's knowledge. If we're discussing equitable distribution of marital assets, we should discuss how Mr. Ashford distributed those assets to his girlfriends. The settlement took 3 months to finalize. In the end, Brandon received significantly less than half, approximately 15% of the company's value, paid out over 5 years. The court agreed that his lack of contribution to the business, his documented infidelity, and the inconsistency between his custody arguments and his asset claims all weighed against a full community property split. He also lost primary custody. You argued that Mrs. Ashford was too consumed by her hobby to be an effective parent, the judge noted. Yet you also now claim her hobby is a $118 million business requiring significant time and expertise. These positions are contradictory. What's not contradictory is Mrs. Ashford's documented primary caregiver status throughout the marriage, the children's expressed preferences, and Mr. Ashford's unstable living situation with his current partner. Primary custody is awarded to Mrs. Ashford. The aftermath was complicated. Brandon took the settlement badly. He expected to walk away from our marriage with minimal obligations to me and maximum claims to whatever assets existed. Instead, he'd been exposed as a man so self-absorbed he missed his wife building an empire under his own roof. The story leaked to the press, these things always do. Cheating husband demands half of wife's hobby, discovers she's a multimillionaire, made for irresistible headlines. The coverage was mostly sympathetic to me, which only made Brandon angrier. He gave interviews claiming I'd deliberately hidden my success from him, that I'd been financially deceptive throughout our marriage. Did she ever explicitly tell you the company didn't make money? One interviewer asked. She called it her blog, her videos, her little website. Those don't sound like descriptions of a major business. Did you ever ask for specifics? Revenue figures? Business plans? I shouldn't have had to ask. We were married. She should have told me. But you also didn't tell her about your affairs. You kept a second apartment without her knowledge. Isn't that a similar kind of not telling? Brandon ended the interview shortly after that. The children adjusted better than I'd feared. Emma was 14, old enough to understand some of what had happened, though I shielded her from the worst details. Michael was 11, mostly confused about why Daddy didn't live with us anymore but resilient in the way children often are. Mom, Emma asked me one evening, about a year after the divorce was finalized, did you really make all that money while Dad didn't know? I really did. How? By working very hard on something I cared about. And by not waiting for anyone's permission or approval to do it. Did you not tell him on purpose? Like, as revenge or something? I thought carefully about how to answer. I didn't tell him because he didn't want to know. Every time I tried to share what I was working on, he dismissed it. He made it clear he wasn't interested. So I stopped trying to share it with him and just focused on building something I was proud of, but he must have noticed something. The money, or the equipment, or... He noticed me spending time on my computer. He complained about it. He said I was neglecting housework, even though the house was always clean. He said I was being a bad mother, even though I was at every school event and doctor's appointment. I paused. Your father saw what he wanted to see. He wanted to see a wife who was less capable than him, less successful, less important. So that's what he saw. Even though it wasn't true. Even though it wasn't true. 3 years have passed since the divorce. Kitchen Mastery continues to grow. We've launched international versions, book series, a cookware line. Revenue last year exceeded $200 million. I've been featured in business magazines and invited to speak at entrepreneurship conferences, a far cry from the stay-at-home mom with a little hobby Brandon had described. The children are thriving. Emma's applying to colleges, passionate about business and media. She's worked as a summer intern at my company, learning the ropes. Michael is a happy, well-adjusted teenager who sees his father every other weekend and has started to understand, in his own way, why his parents couldn't stay married. Brandon remarried, his assistant, the fifth affair. They had a baby last year. He's still paying the settlement, still bitter about how things turned out, still convinced he was wronged by a system that failed to recognize his true value. I don't think about him much anymore. What I think about is what I built, the company, the team, the community of people who've learned to cook and feed their families through my platform. What I think about is the satisfaction of creating something real, something valuable, something that exists because I put in the work day after day while everyone around me dismissed it as unimportant. Brandon wanted 50% of my online hobby. The forensic accountant found $118 million in annual revenue. The settlement gave him 15%, paid out over time. But the real victory wasn't financial. The real victory was learning that I didn't need his belief, his support, or his approval to build something extraordinary. I'd done it without him, literally without him noticing, and I'd proven to myself and to my children that capability doesn't require recognition. Sometimes the people closest to you can't see what's right in front of them. Sometimes that blindness is their problem, not yours. Brandon looked at me every day for 4 years and saw a woman playing pretend. The world saw something different. And in the end, the world was right. Last month, I received a letter. It was from Brandon, handwritten, which surprised me. He'd never been much for personal communication. Caroline, I know you have no reason to read this, but I wanted to say something I should have said years ago. I was wrong. Not just about the affairs, I've acknowledged those failures, but about everything else. About who you were, what you were capable of, what you were building while I wasn't paying attention. I told myself I was the successful one. I told myself your computer time was a distraction from your real job of supporting my career and raising our kids. I never stopped to consider that you might be creating something bigger than anything I'd ever achieved. I should have asked. I should have been curious. I should have been proud instead of dismissive. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I finally see what I missed. Brandon. I read the letter twice. Then I filed it away with the other paperwork from the divorce. Some acknowledgements come too late to matter. Some apologies can't undo years of dismissal. I'd built my success without Brandon's recognition. His recognition now, arriving 3 years after it might have meant something, was irrelevant. What mattered was what I'd proven, to my children, to myself, to the world. A little hobby can change your life. An online thing can change the world. And a dismissive husband can miss an entire fortune happening right under his nose. That's his loss. Not mine.